So when freedom dies, it doesn't announce itself. It gets rebranded, repackaged, typically as safety. It gets signed into law and buried under good intentions. Now, remember that as we move forward in this video, by the time that we actually, get to the whole cameras part of this video, hopefully you'll see what I'm saying when I say that. From here, we pivot to a massive bust that happened where, over the course of 2 years, various feds watched. They went through all these different chats. They tracked money. They knew names and routes and properties, and they didn't do anything. They didn't move. They just waited like a snake in the bush. And they waited until now anyways. And a lot of news outlets out there are actually hailing this as, some kind of strategic strike. But I have to disagree with that. Just fundamentally, in the definition of the word strike, the label really makes sense if they actually broke in, right? Like if they actually cracked encryption or exploited a vulnerability, I would agree. They didn't for, really for what we're talking about. For at least one of these sources, of their intelligence that they actually used. They sat on intelligence that they either stumbled into or quietly harvested. And that's something that we kind of see repeatedly throughout all these, busts. So if you create something, say, for example, you plant a seed, you let it grow, then you rip it out later, like that's on a bust or a strike, it's a harvest, right? So I know that this is kind of a trivial point, but I do think that, the framing of anything really, really matters if you really want to show it in any kind of honest format or have an honest discussion about it. So what I'm actually talking about is called...
We could name this Operation BULUT.
The name itself is supposed to mean cloud in Turkish, and Europol claims this to be a point of reference to the criminal cloud that, was supposedly cracked open by them, specifically like these communication platforms, which, it's kind of funny for a few reasons. And one of which we'll get into in a bit, but the media is basically calling it one of the biggest drug busts in European history, which is why I'm making this video. If you understand history, it's kind of funny to hear that even, especially when you consider that the British Empire ran one of the largest drug cartels in history, trafficking opium into China for 127 years straight. So do you know any drug dealers at all that have ever moved weight for over 125 years? I don't, it's at its peak, they were moving over 6,000 tons of opium a year, generating up to 20% of their imperial revenue from it. 2 wars were even fought, to protect the trade, one in 1939 and another in 1856. So they went to war twice to actually protect the trade. Those wars actually being called the First and the Second Opium War, which left 50,000 Chinese dead and 2,000 to 3,000 British and French dead. So shout out to Captain Blackbeard, by the way, who's on, pitch. And I would cite that old pirate line that goes, when kings do it, it's called an empire. When you do it, it's called a crime. Anyway, I digress. I'm getting off topic with this, but Europol's essentially, they're parading around talking about these 232 people that they arrested. But if we think about this, that's arrests, not convictions. Now, in the media, mass arrests absolutely look impressive, but how many were actually high-level players? The Europol didn't say. And that's because rounding, couriers up and girlfriends and warehouse managers is, you could act like it's dismantling a network. It's really not, though. It's just optics. It's numbers to be able to throw around. It's like a guy at a gym that's, constantly flexing and talking real loud. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if you actually read through what they say, they don't actually say that any of these people that they actually busted were violent criminals or there was any violence done in commission of any of these crimes. Basically, typically when they catch violent criminals or gather evidence that shows violence, that's one of the things that they really love to brag about. And I didn't see any of that or hear about any of it. So I would say that it's safe to assume that there wasn't really any evidence of any violence. So another interesting statistical anomaly was the fact that they stated that they ended up seizing 681 properties, yet they only seized 127 vehicles. So let me ask you this. Do you know a lot of people with 2 houses and 1 vehicle? I don't. Usually it's the opposite. People have more vehicles than they do houses. Typically, right? Like on average. The ratio doesn't really make sense. Like, either these people were laundering real estate like absolute pros, or they just vacuumed up every rental, stash house, and side apartment that basically had a paper trail. And the 300 million euros, when we talk about that because it's assets, they're saying, you have to ask, who's it according to? Is it market value? Is it black market value? Is it a police estimate? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they make it sound like this huge, massive thing. I'm not saying 300 million is not a huge, massive amount. It is, but we don't really know what it is, you know? And it's just, I think it's a lot of padding. But if you've got all that intelligence from what the, SkyECC and which is the 2 things they used, this bust probably should have happened sooner, right? So April 15th, Europol hits 6 countries in one coordinated strike. Turkey, Belgium, France, Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands. They had simultaneous raids with what they called HVTs or high-value targets. The headlines all screamed victory, praising them for their heroic work in listening to conversations and then going arresting people who had them. But one thing that I always find interesting with these is no one actually does what I'm doing now and questions any of the things that are actually said. They just assume everything is true. Some of the things they don't say is that this wasn't new intelligence, right? This was recycled data from 2 already compromised platforms, one being SkyECC, which was cracked way back in 2021, and the latter was never actually cracked. And by the latter, I meant ANOM. That doesn't really make sense. Then, how were they able to get intelligence from it, right? Well, they're able to get intelligence from it because they were the ones who actually constructed the communications platform in the beginning. It's what allowed all that criminality to actually happen in the first place. They built it as a honeypot years ago by the FBI. Law enforcement didn't just passively kind of sit back and observe. They actually created infrastructure for criminality, right? And they provided the illusion of privacy, then watched people incriminate themselves in a system that they were led to trust, which is stupid, but it's a side point. If you build the room, right, and wire it for sound and invite everyone in and wait for them to talk, to me, that's not like cracking a case. It's not figuring something out. It's harvesting a case. And that's my point. It's just the wording is deceptive, and I dislike that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that legally what they did was wrong, because it's not under, United States laws. I don't know about those countries, but that's mainly because I don't understand the laws of those countries and wouldn't speak to them because of that. What I'm saying is that it's on you and you alone to ensure that the communications platform that you're speaking on is secure. And obviously, nothing is secure, right? Nothing in this world is 100% secure. But in this case of an app, there are absolutely some things that these people could have done to, validate that they were using something secure. Those who fell victim to it could have done things that absolutely would have been proactive that would have completely prevented them from having to be in this position that they're actually in now. And, what I'm pointing out is that had they taken a step in any direction toward InfoSec or information security, they would have realized that, speaking on an application that is completely closed source, which means you have no clue what's actually going on behind the scenes, right off the bat is probably not the best idea. Furthermore, one that's not been vetted for like multiple years by tons of people is another massive, massive red flag. It matters, right? Because when you end up having a full view into enemy communications for years and years and years, it begs the question, was this about strategy, or was it just about like a waiting game to let a criminal network kind of fatten up and create more connections, right? Like launder more money and become easier to map out. I'd be curious to know how, all the other regular citizens that were actually being spied on felt about that, right? Because not everybody who uses a privacy app or a privacy-centric phone is a criminal. Like, although you could argue that in the UK, they might be seen as one nowadays, in some cases, just for posting a meme, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. If we go back a little bit and we look at the beginning of SkyECC, for example.
To really own their data, to own their communication, their data, their files, their photos, their storage, to belong to them, and know that there isn't an ability for unauthorized access other than them, the true rightful owner of data. And I believe that that's how the world should be. That if your thoughts should belong to you, your data should belong to you. It doesn't belong to anybody else.
It was actually a legitimate company that was founded in Canada and basically marketed itself as a secure encrypted messaging solution. It had triple encryption, which is ECC, AES, and SSL. Flash messages, direct swipes, keys stored on the device, basically like all the trademarks that you would expect to see of something that was designed by paranoid people for paranoid people. And in total, I think the last number that I saw was around like 170,000 users, which combined had something like 3 million daily messages. Now, obviously some of those are criminals, but not all of them. I can guarantee you, if there were, the arrests would have been a lot more than 232 measly arrests, right? Like they didn't act then in 2021. Instead, French authorities shared decrypted SkyECC data with Turkey. We're talking about entire conversations here. This is all leading to this first wave of arrests that actually happened. Turkish police were even stationed at Europol headquarters, sifting through the data alongside European analysts to identify what they called high-value targets. Sky Global, the company that was actually behind it, ended up getting totally vaporized, and the website seized, and the CEO got indicted. Basically game over for him. And then there was ANOM. And if SkyECC was a technical win, ANOM was a psychological warfare operation, basically. The FBI created this encrypted messaging app and disguised it behind a fake calculator and interface. And you'd unlock it with a code, and suddenly you had this chat app that looked secure, but every message that went through went straight to law enforcement. So it was sold through these rats, these trusted informants, and that were actively in like criminal organizations at the time. Over 100 countries, they said 300 syndicates adopted it, but who knows how true that is, right? If they were willing to build infrastructure and lie, I see no reason to actually think that the numbers they provide are true. Just, you can call me an idiot for not, believing no liars, but by 2021, they intercepted 27 million messages, supposedly, this according to them, and had more mass arrests. And yet again, years passed before Operation BULUT actually got triggered. And Europol admits that they had ongoing real-time coordination platforms that were running silent surveillance in place through, things like passenger record checks. And that means that they had tools, data, and they still sat and they waited. So what are we really seeing here, right? Is this a victory for Europol, or evidence that even the most advanced surveillance still depends on things like bad human behavior, like not researching the app, right? Or using a closed source one. I'm not kidding about the surveillance state either, right? Like from the information I was able to pull, London alone is estimated to have some like 63,000 CCTV cameras, the 20,873 cameras managed by the 34 London boroughs, 15,576 cameras operated by the Transportation for London, and approximately 3,000 cameras maintained by the Metropolitan Police. Now, over 24,000 body-worn cameras are used by officers there as well. So, at least in like 1984, Winston just had the one camera in his room. It's crazy that we've outdone 1984 by miles. But keep in mind that this kind of surveillance tech doesn't stay pointed at drug dealers. Like, once it exists, it spreads. How many cameras do you see them decommission in comparison to them adding? The EU is already trying to roll out something called chat control, and we basically covered this in another video, and since then it kind of went away. Then it came back again, and now they're rebranding it. It's basically a law that would force messaging apps to scan every private message that you send, even inside end-to-end encrypted apps like Signal. And they would, the authorities would get all that information before it's actually sent. Does it sound familiar, right? Like we talked about something like this, the exact same thing actually, in 2 videos ago, and it was a rat, So the politicians, at every turn, they pimp the children, citing that it's because of them that they need to spy on everything and everyone, and it's that tired line of protecting the children. When in reality, they could really care less, right? If you want to look at like Epstein's Island, typically when it comes to kids, politicians, it's usually not a good story about actually what happens between them. But really means is scanning everything by default without a warrant, without probable cause, and without consent. And if that's not bad enough, like Germany passed laws that allow authorities to seize crypto if they even suspect that it's tied to a crime, even if you haven't been charged or convicted. And they're not alone, right? Like France has absolutely been doing crazy stuff like this too, under organized crime seizure laws that were passed in 2021. And you don't need to know that you're on a list. If they decide to take it, it's gone. The UK went further, and the police now can grab crypto assets without even an arrest, and in some cases even destroy them without an arrest. And if you think this stuff stays limited to like real criminals, ask yourself why the EU's new AI law basically refuses to ban stuff like biometric mass surveillance. In cities like London, you're already on camera hundreds of times a day, and now they want your messages too. In Germany, journalist, for example, David Bendels, was handed a 7-month suspended sentence in 2025 for posting a meme that mocked the Interior Minister, Nancy Feshers, no idea if I pronounced her name right, basically digitally edited to show her holding a sign that said, "I hate free speech." And the court ruled it defamation and that it defamed a public official. In Spain, a student, Cassandra Vera, was sentenced to 1 year in prison in 2017 for tweeting jokes about a Franco-era politician's assassination. The state charged her under laws against glorifying terrorism. In Greece, Philanopoulos Loizars was given a 10-month prison suspended sentence in 2014 for running a Facebook parody page mocking an Orthodox monk. He was convicted of insulting religion. And in the UK, Lee Dawn got 8 weeks in jail in 2014 for posting what the court called grossly offensive memes that could stir racial tension. No violence, just basically images on a screen. Also in the UK, Jordan Poehler received 20 months in prison for Facebook posts about attacking a migrant housing site. His words alone, without any action, got him nearly 2 years in time. Once the infrastructure exists, stuff like, decryption tools, honeypots, messaging apps, jurisdiction bending intelligence, sharing, it will all expand. It always does. And this operation, my opinion, was just a fleck. It was also kind of a signal that the age of privacy, which we know has long been under attack, is continually under attack. So, what do you personally think about all this? I'd love to hear it. Because here's what I see. 0 mention of violence, no terrorism charges, no kidnappings, just a massive dragnet of apparently nonviolent people selling things that others wanted to buy and did so through consensual trades. And they've been framed now as, these external and existential threats to society. So they create this illusion. They build this entire infrastructure and tear it down just to justify the surveillance that made it possible in the first place, which also desensitizes people to the long-term government programs of surveillance. And then they use inflated numbers and claim victory and never mention that the setup was all honeypot. It was a delayed action until it was actually politically useful. Then they dump everything and arrest everyone to generate headlines and manufacture fear. They ignore due process. They blur the line between, accusation and guilt. They seize first and explain later, if ever. Meanwhile, they pass laws to scan your messages, take your crypto without charges, lock people up for speech, and basically sell it all to you as protection. Because the system that they used on them, those drug traffickers, is really built for everyone else as well. Thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.